If you hear mutual fund peddlers talk about equity savings funds, you can't help but invest in them. Here is what they will tell you. Number one, over the last 1, 3 and 5 years, these funds have delivered 14.9%, 8.9% and 9.2%. Number two, they invest about 2/3 of their portfolio in debt or arbitrage. So they are relatively safer compared to pure equity funds, but they enjoy equity-like taxation. So in a world where debt funds are being taxed on the slab rate, they are a great substitute. Well, really, it's difficult not to fall for this pitch. Moreover, removing the indexation benefit for debt funds in the Union Budget 2023 has even strengthened the case for equity savings funds. It may have contributed to high inflows in this category as well. So are equity savings funds really as good they are made out to be? Hello and welcome to ET Money's YouTube channel. Today, we will talk about equity savings funds and whether they can act as a substitute for debt funds. But before I start, a quick reminder. You are watching this video on ET Money's English channel. हमारा एक हिंदी चैनल भी है जहाँ पे ये सारी वीडियोस आप हिंदी में देख सकते हैं. And if you are or know somebody who wants to understand the basics of finance in quick 5 minutes, we have a channel called 5 Minute Finance. You can find the link of these channels in the description. Alright, let's now start with our analysis. But before that, let me give you a quick overview of equity savings funds. Equity savings funds are a type of hybrid fund. As per SEBI's mandate, these funds must invest at least 65% in equity or equity-linked instruments and at least 10% in debt. Now, this equity-linked instruments is nothing but arbitrage. So, these funds typically invest in equity, arbitrage and debt. Now, the chart on your screen shows the current asset allocation of the largest equity savings funds by AUM. You can see the varying allocation to equity, debt and arbitrage, with ICICI Prudential Equity Savings Fund having the least equity allocation of 16.12%. Now, if you don't understand arbitrage, here's a quick explainer. Arbitrage is the difference between the price of a security between two markets, often cash and derivative markets. Arbitrage investing is profiting from this price differential. So despite involving equity markets, arbitrage is a relatively low risk way of generating returns. Of course, the returns are not too high and one can expect only liquid fund like returns from arbitrage investing. So the debt and the arbitrage components of equity savings funds do correspond with debt funds, but the similarity ends here. Equity savings funds have an equity component too. As we saw in the chart a short while ago, this component is as high as 36% in one of the funds. Now, it is this equity component that can add significant volatility to their returns. Of course, it can also boost their returns. But more on this later. First, let's quickly discuss the taxation of these funds. Since equity savings funds invest at least 65% in equity and arbitrage, they qualify for equity-like taxation. That means gains in equity savings funds are taxed at 15% if redeemed within 1 year and at 10% for gains exceeding 1 lakh rupees if redeemed after 1 year. So if someone is in the 20 or 30% tax slab, equity savings funds are seemingly more appealing than debt funds. After all, gains in debt funds are taxed as per their tax slab. So the promise of equity saving funds lies in good 8-9% returns, safety of debt and arbitrage, and equity-like taxation. And if the stock market is in a bull run, as is the case over the last 1 year or so, then who would mind a couple of extra percentage points of returns? Or is all of this too good to be true? Well, that's what we will find in the next part of the video. Let's start with the returns. We'll compare the returns of equity savings funds with debt funds across time frames: 1 year, 3 years and 5 years. We will consider 3 categories for debt funds: money market funds, short duration funds and medium duration funds. Now, as per SEBI mandate, money market funds have bonds with maturities of up to 1 year. So we'll use them to compare 1 year returns. Similarly, short duration and medium duration funds are appropriate for comparing 3 and 5 year returns. For returns, we looked at the average rolling returns. Now, rolling returns are all instances of returns for a certain period over a time span. For example, if it's 3-year rolling returns, we are talking about all instances of 3-year returns over time. Now, these instances are then averaged to arrive at one number, and this number is the average rolling returns. So, average rolling return is a reliable estimate of an investment's performance over a certain period between two dates. Now, the table on your screen mentions the average 1, 3 and 5-year average rolling returns of equity savings fund versus the 3 debt categories. Unsurprisingly, equity saving funds do better across all time frames than their debt fund counterparts. The outperformance ranges from 2.8 to 4 percentage point, so it's quite considerable. However, that's half the picture. As I hinted earlier, this performance could come at a cost, as equity saving funds would also have more volatility than debt funds. So let's now look at the risk involved in equity saving funds. Let's first check the volatility of the rolling returns we just saw. To measure volatility, we use a metric called standard deviation. The higher the standard deviation, the more the volatility. As you can see, across time frames, equity saving funds have turned out to be more volatile than their debt fund counterparts. They are 4 times more volatile than money market funds for 1 year period. They are 30% more volatile than short duration funds for the 3-year period. And they are 6 times more volatile than medium duration funds over a 5-year period. So while they do generate higher returns, these returns come with high volatility. Alright, let's check another data point. But wait, because we just talked about volatility, I'm reminded of the volatility or the risk that life in general has. And what could be a better way to prepare for it by getting adequate life and health insurance? Now, on the ET Money app, you can buy term insurance and health insurance at highly competitive prices, and that too very conveniently. So do check them out. Alright, let's move to the other data point I just mentioned. If we see the worst returns of equity saving funds across short time spans and compare them with those of debt categories, we get an even clearer picture of the risk involved. For instance, the worst 1-year returns for equity saving funds are negative 15.4%. Even if you increase the holding period to 1 year, the worst returns remain negative at 10.45%. Now compare this with the worst returns of the 3 debt categories. For a 1-month period, the worst returns are minus 0.7%, minus 1.9%, and minus 4.6%. Now as the holding period increases, these worst outcomes keep coming down. For a 1-year period, none of the 3 debt categories have returned a negative number. And that's what investors expect from their debt investments. Now yet another way to look at this data is to check the percent of instances of negative returns across short time spans. Now for very short time periods like 1 week, 1 month, or even 3 months, there is a reasonably high probability of negative returns from equity savings funds. On the other hand, the 3 debt categories do considerably well. The most notable among them is money market funds, which haven't delivered a negative return even for a 1-month period. And as the holding period increases to 1 year, none of the 3 debt categories lose money. But in the case of equity saving funds, the returns are negative in 6% of the cases. Now, all these data points prove that equity saving funds can be quite volatile and can lose money over short periods. So if you had debt fund-like performance in mind while investing in equity savings funds, you could be in for an unpleasant surprise. So it's better not to see equity saving funds as a substitute for debt funds. Alright, so where do they fit then? And who should invest in them? Let's answer these questions now. First things first, it's advisable not to see equity saving funds as a substitute for debt funds. So if you need to invest in debt funds, it's better not to opt for equity savings funds. Actually, it's better to see equity saving funds not as a substitute for another product, but as an individual product in itself. To understand the positioning of this fund in your portfolio, take a look at the table on your screen. Over 3 and 5-year periods, the percentage of instances of negative returns from equity savings funds have come down to 0. So they haven't lost money during these periods. Over 3 and 5 years, they have returned over 5% returns in all cases. Over 5-year periods, there are a very heavy chance, 82%, that you would have got 5 to 10% returns from these funds. Take a look at this table now. It shows the maximum and minimum returns equity saving funds have delivered across time spans. Over a 5-year period, the minimum return is a good 7.37%. Now this data points show that the holding period for equity saving funds should be at least 3 years. That makes these funds good for medium-term investing of 3 to 5 years. So if you don't have investment horizon of at least 5 years, which is needed for investing in equity, but you can stay invested for at least 3 to 5 years, equity savings funds could be a good option. In other words, these funds are placed between debt funds and pure equity funds. But who should invest in them? As I said, these funds are meant only for those who have medium-term horizon. For instance, you may be saving for the down payment of a house, or you may be thinking of upgrading your car or starting a new business. If these goals are 3 to 5 years away, you can consider equity saving funds for them. But you should be able to and willing to tolerate the higher volatility of these funds. Now, if you don't want your investments to be volatile, it's better to steer clear of equity saving funds and go for debt funds or any other safer avenue. That's because if the volatility in equity saving funds forces you to sell out at a loss, that may turn out to be more expensive than the higher tax outgo with fixed income avenues. So on in all, assess your requirements and your risk appetite and do what is right for you. And that's all I had for you today. Hope you liked this video, and if you did, do share it with your friends and family. I'll be back with another video very soon. Till then, take care.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.